I'm hoping that perhaps with this presentation you get a bit more insight into what the GDPR affords in terms of data protection. How many of you are interested in privacy from a personal perspective, as an individual, if we want to transition from your talk? So hands up. You might leave your hand up for the next question. How many of you are also here, or are here, forget that also, for information about the GDPR from a professional perspective, that, you know, GDPR can help your organization, your project, your product. Super, so it's pretty much half-half. So, I'm hoping this remote works, or should I work the remote in the correct way? Yeah! Okay. So, so my name is Alex, and I work for Tech GDPR, which is a small boutique consulting company that supports tech companies like IoT, artificial intelligence, blockchain companies, with questions related pertaining to privacy. My background originally is not in privacy. I started as a language trainer, actually many years ago. Then I moved to e-learning, and from there to quality management. And this is what opened my eyes to frameworks and how they can help. So compliance in general, how it gives you a framework to do the right thing, to quote Spike Lee. The GDPR approach to data protection. So a lot of people come to us at Tech GDPR. I mean, we have clients from the US saying, hey, should I comply to the GDPR? I mean, I'm in the US. Basic questions, right? Or how can the GDPR have an impact when the territorial scope of the GDPR is the EU? Really interesting questions. A lot of research is being done on that. But mostly people are quite depressed. They're quite pessimistic about data protection. You know, they think, well, you know, we have these things in our pockets that are knowingly leaking megabytes, gigabytes of information about our lives. Yet, you know, so that being the case, we think, well, if it's already out there, what can I do to better secure myself, or what's there for me? So I'm hoping I can give you a short schizophrenic presentation of the GDPR. Okay, I was hoping somebody might say, why schizophrenic? Okay, forget it. Notice the color code. Schizophrenic because your right as a data subject in blue is the organization's obligation in pink. Does that make sense? If you have the right to something, then it's the organization that to whom you entrust your data to that has an obligation towards you. Yeah? All right. Yeah, if you guys have QR code scanners, you can scan. I can also share the presentation. But this is, I put together, so if you go to the Eurolex website, you can actually choose languages and print or display a multilingual version of the GDPR, which is great. I'm French, so I actually prefer reading it in English, because I'm not familiar with the French terms. And I got into data protection in Germany, so I'm slightly more familiar with the German terms, and displaying them side by side is great. I tried the QR code on my phone, and it doesn't display well on small screen, but it'll give you a link to open it in monolingual version. How many of you have actually been in contact with the directive, the regulation, sorry? Okay. Have you read through it a little bit or scanned through it just to see the structure? Yeah? I have to say, and I don't want to boast about it, but it's not a complicated text. There's a lot of it that you don't need to read through to get to the essential. And if any of you are really interested, genuinely interested, pitch me an email, and I can make a bullet list of articles that you should read, and the articles are usually on a page. There's 99 articles, but probably reading 12 of them will give you, a bit like the Pareto principle, will give you 80% of what you should know about the GDPR. Very quickly, data protection is often referred to as privacy. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. It's, from my experience of it, the two terms are interchangeable. Now, data protection, unlike what we normally think of it as the protection of personal data, is actually the protection of the data subject in case something happens to their personal data. Does that make sense? As such, it's an element of information security. And information security is the protection of an organization's assets, data or information assets. It could be intellectual property, it could be what's in somebody's brain as know-how, it could be written out processes, it could be patents. And, of course, personal data from employees, personal data from partners, from website visitors, personal data from customers. So data protection is an element of information security, or it relies on information security to raise it. Does that also make sense? The term processing comes, I would like to do a word cloud by feeding the whole GDPR text into a word cloud generator, but I'm sure processing will be in the middle. It comes out over and over again. Processing is a generic term that refers to anything that you do to data. From the collection of data, and I also make that mistake myself. Anytime today I mention collection, I might actually mean processing. So from the collection of data to all the way to the storage of data. But anything to do with transferring data, analyzing data, accessing data, losing it, well, theoretically, if you lose it, it's unintentional, so you might not be aware of it. But anything that you do to data is data processing within the definition of the GDPR. Does that also make sense? Cool. Is there anything new for anybody here? Or maybe I'm just consolidating what you already sort of understood.
Give me some feedback.
Yeah, right. And just raise your hand if you need more information. So the question that I was presented by Ellie is, how does the GDPR participate in making data protection controllable again? How can it give you as a data subject controls over your data, and how does it present a framework for an organization to do things the right way? And this is what I'm going to try to answer in the next slide, I believe. Right. It does so with by approaching it from 4 different angles. There are 4 levers, what I call levers of data protection. It defines roles. It's based on principles. It's principles that don't belong to the GDPR, they belong to data protection in general. Other frameworks protecting data also include those principles. It provides data subjects with rights, notice the blue color, and it creates competencies, or it makes provisions for the creation of competent bodies. And I'll not spend much time on that. So roles, you might be familiar with those terms. Data subject, you and I, right? Anybody? Actually, a dead person is out of scope of the GDPR, so their data is not protected by the GDPR. If a dead person's data has an effect on a living person, then it does, but through that person. Sorry for the grim parenthesis. Right, data subject is a natural person. A data controller, you familiar with that term? A data controller is basically an organization that defines the means and purposes of processing. So what information am I going to collect from you, for what purposes, and how? That makes the company a controller. Now, controllers might handle the processing themselves, but they might outsource part of it to another organization, and that's known as a data processor. The data processor might pass part of its processing to another company, and that would make it a sub-processor. Now, there are rules on how this should happen, so I can get to that in a moment. And if two controllers work together, then they're called joint controllers. So imagine you're building an app collecting personal information for an event management solution, and then suddenly you're partnering with Eventim. And Eventim is also accessing some of that information, or additional information. Well, that would make your organization and Eventim joint controllers with shared responsibilities, for instance, at least for the data they collect. A data recipient is an organization that receives the data at the end of the processing chain. And an example I always give is the tax office. So if you're an employer, you're a data controller, you collect the Steuernummer from your employees, because that's a legal obligation that you have to do so, and you have to declare to the tax office what wage you pay out. Yeah? So the end recipient of that data would be the tax office, right? Does that make sense? From there, it doesn't go anywhere else. Any questions? Is it boring?
No.
All right, we get some water. Now for principles. Data protection principles include lawfulness, and I've highlighted this because I'm going to get back to it soon. Legal basis for collecting and processing your data. For instance, when you give consent, that's a legal base. It makes that collection lawful if it's done properly, unlawful if it's not. Purpose limitation means you should collect for one purpose, collect or process for one purpose only. If you collect a lot of information thinking, I might use it for analytics in the future, then you are in serious breach of the GDPR by virtue of violating this principle. Data minimization. If you don't need to know my home address to send me an email newsletter, don't collect it. Einfach. Data accuracy. Okay, I'm going to point to those two. Data accuracy and integrity and confidentiality are the sogenannte CIA. Principles of information security, making data accessible, also part of the integrity, making it confidential, you access it on a need-to-know basis within a company, and accurate. You process it if it's accurate, if it's inaccurate, you strive to correct it, or you delete it. Very important principle here. I mean, all of them are. I don't know why I'm saying this. Storage limitation. Whenever you process data, you collect it. I was talking to Alex earlier, and you were telling me your solution just processes it, and it's gone. It's not. It doesn't even get to a hard drive. It stays in the RAM. Magic. In that case, your storage is milliseconds, but if you're storing data beyond the original purpose that you collected it for, then you're in breach of that principle. Right? If I'm renting, if I visit a hotel, they might want to collect my data, but there's no reason for them to hold on to my data once I've left, returned the keys, left. Maybe they have legal obligations, maybe they have interests in keeping track of who you are, where you live, in case they realize you broke something, fine. In that case, they can justify, we'll keep it for 2 weeks, 2 months, but 2 years, very unlikely. Hard to support if you're under scrutiny from a national data protection authority. And accountability. So whereas these principles apply to data, this one applies to data controllers, right? As a controller, you need to know what you're doing, who you're doing it with, for what reason, and so on and so forth. If you can't answer those questions, We'll get to it. Rights. As a data subject, you have the right of access. You're probably familiar with this, right? At least indirectly from reading articles. Right of access means you have the right to know what information is being processed, or was collected, or was received by an organization. If you find that it's incorrect, you have the right to rectify it. I've often thought, if I want to stay, maybe Mozilla has an answer to that. If I want to stay private on the web, maybe I should just pollute it with false information about myself. I don't know how that argument holds, but I've often asked myself that question. Since I can't avoid putting data, I might change my name or every now and then. Incidentally, I did what you mentioned like a few days ago, because I got a new phone and I was like exploring things, and for some reason it's reverted to the old. I need to find out why. Erasure. You have the right to be forgotten. Sometimes that doesn't apply, and I'll get to it. But usually it's because there's a legal obligation to keep a record of. For instance, you buy online. Somebody mentioned online retailer. You buy a product online. I think in Germany the Abbewahrungsfrist, the duration period for which you need to keep records of that transaction having happened is 10 years. So you can ask, delete my data, they'll say yes, but we have to keep on to those data sets because we have a legal obligation. So in some cases, your rights can't apply, and I'll get to that. I'll get to it in the breakout session because it's getting into details. Restriction, you have the right to request that your data be restricted, especially if you contest the legality of its being processed. Like, hey, where did you get my data from? I don't remember giving it to you. In the meantime, stop processing it and come up with proof. Portability, you have the right to request that your data be given to you in a portable format, or even transferred directly to another company. Now, if you request Google to give, I mean, it was in the news in Germany, I think a lawyer, or a politician, I think. A politician did a request from his phone provider to have access to his data records, and he got a DVD full of all the phone calls he'd made in the last 10 years. Like, you couldn't even print it. Whether or not he would want to then send that on to another provider doesn't make much sense, perhaps, but you have the right to request that. And you have the right to object. Specifically to object being subject to profiling and direct marketing. So direct marketing in itself is not unlawful if it's done lawfully. And I can get to those details later. Yeah.
Yeah. Now that you mentioned the keyword profiling, I have a small question.
Yeah.
Or before that, I'm not sure. When it comes to HR startups, it's becoming more and more scary what's out there, especially when it comes to, I don't know, non-European companies. For instance, there's one, it's called Crystal Nose. What they do is really scary. They get all the data and I try to fight them. Been trying for months now, and they still. So what they do is they gather data from all over whatever. They go back in time and buy it somewhere, I guess, because sometimes it's really weird. And then they give companies some kind of evaluation, like would that be a good candidate for that role or not?
Yeah.
And they don't at all react to GDPR. What
they can. They actually can, but it's so complex that it's very likely that they'll slip and make a mistake that you could catch them on. If we can talk about it, I'd be very interested in looking into that. You have the right to object to automatic decision making. So, for instance, determining whether or not you're a good candidate.
Yes.
Now, the way to work around that as an organization is to put a person, like a bank, for instance. A bank would look through your records, look through your records and say, well, okay, this guy deserves this credit or this, this rate, whatever. You can oppose that happening, but as long as there's a human involved in the process, at least somebody saying, hey, this is what you're worth, then it's not objectionable. Anyway, okay. Competencies, really quick. National protection authorities, you've probably heard of the CNIL in France, the ICO in Britain. In Germany they have 16. They're created and given the task of educating the public and organizations, coordinating among each other for cross-border disputes, investigating. They can do unannounced audits, ordering measures, after which, if they haven't been implemented, they impose fines. Right. I'm reaching the end. So, yeah, I'm reaching the end actually. This is, I think, the slide before last. So what can organizations, how do organizations typically fail, or what do they fail on? What do they fail at? And what can you do as a data subject? So first, organizations. First thing is they fail to define their roles, who they are as an organization, who they're processing, and how to contact these organizations. They often fail on lack of clarity in the privacy policy, for instance. Not only if you write to them and they're not clear about their answer, that's one thing. They don't have DPAs, data processing addendums or agreements. They fail to implement TOMs that implement data protection principles. For instance, they have no control over who has access to which database. So somebody from HR has access to finance data. They fail to inform you of your rights. They fail to help you exercise your rights. So making it difficult, making it unclear, for instance. And they don't act with accountability or cooperate with the supervisory authority. I always want to say NSA, National Supervisory Authority, but I know that conjures up other images. What can you do as a data subject? Well, you can check whether or not the data protection principles in Article 5, exactly the ones I listed, it's a very short article, are implemented, whether or not the processing is lawful. You've all heard of giving consent. That's one of the 6 possible legal bases that make processing lawful. I'll skip one, control two. Yes, you can challenge the controller through the right to lodge a complaint, which is Article 77. And Article 78 makes it possible for you to challenge the supervisory authority directly if you believe they haven't addressed your request properly. And that's done through a local court. And if the local court doesn't give you satisfaction, you can go to the European Court of Justice. And believe me, people have done this, which has invalidated one huge instrument for transfers known as the safe harbor, replaced by what you've probably heard of as privacy shield, which just about makes transfers of data, personal data to the US legal. So Facebook is on there, I think. Google is on there. AWS is on there. So when you or one of your processes transfers personal data to the US, to those companies, on servers outside of the EU, they're just about legally covered to do so. If not, you might be footing the bill of a fine. So take it super seriously. I don't want to sound pessimistic, but it's so the text is easy, the principles are easy, but the implementation and the amount of exceptions make it super difficult to adapt the GDPR to technology, and this is how we help organizations. Okay, I'll skip this. Oh, I'm going the wrong direction. And just pitch for my church, as we say in France. You can join me in the breakout room. I'll be showing you what makes processing lawful, how rights and obligations complement each other. So you have actually more rights than the ones I listed, if you know how to read it. We'll look at how lead generation companies can legally use your data, the data you make publicly available. Why some of your rights are not always exercisable. That's a bit complex, but I've made a decision tree to help you understand that. How your grandma's sewing habits can be processed lawfully. I've made a really data gesichert Darstellung. I think you'll like it. A few examples of worst practices, i.e. don't be a dick and apply them. Thank you.